As indigenous communities that have suffered for years discrimination, marginalization, criminalization, and oppression by our own nation, the modern state should recognize the rights of every human and consider them on its territory as a political being, regardless of their culture, of their historical background, of their social class, of their race, religion, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. It's unfair to use a reason like your way of being like an excuse to reject our rights. Just like happened in February 1996, the federal government and the EZLN set down the San Andres Agreement that recognized indigenous people in the Mexican Constitution. However, the Mexican government has systematically ignored the San Andres Agreement, and dialogue is closed from then on. As a result, almost 30 years have passed and the promised reforms haven't yet been implemented. It's impossible to understand our fight, our efforts, and necessities from people's privilege and close-mindedness. Furthermore, there must be dialogues to listen and understand each other, empathy, and equal access to justice. People need to know our history in order to avoid misunderstanding, because those who don't see what lies behind our fight tends to criminalize and judge our actions. That is why the ESLN was born in the first place, because the violence we live through every day is not valid for decision makers. As happened with the TV transmission that the president in turn did, Carlos Salinas, and after with Ernesto Cedillo, the one who disclaimed the San Andres Agreement, and so successively with every administration that we have had. No one has concrete neither the national nor the international agreements from the International Labour Organization and the United Nations Organization. A modern state needs an intersectionality vision, serious dialogues, and tangible actions to make visible the injustice we live in our everyday lives. For example, 7 out of 10 indigenous live in poverty conditions according to the economists. Not all the poor people are indigenous, but all the indigenous are poor. Our intentions are clear: to move on and be recognized constitutionally, to have public policies from the government in synergy with the Indigenous Communities National Institute to help us thrive, be guaranteed the rights to consultation, be granted the jurisdiction of the state, receive essential services to live a dignified life, to be recognized as a political, economical, and social being. We want to be Mexicans like the rest of the people who live in the cities. No more a Mexico without us.
Okay, you have a good point. Now, from the point of view of the government, to strengthen cultural identity, it's necessary to know the cultural heritage of a people or a nation. This way of helping to affirm and develop the sense of belonging and identity. Now the critically assess the history of the community, of people, of the origin, and those who live there. Now, among the human rights that serve as support of multiculturalism, there are 3 pillars to defend differences based on respect. The right to equally together with the prohibition of discrimination, freedom of the person, and freedom of expression. It is necessary to begin by respecting the right to decide, pursuing their economic, social, and cultural development without external interference and coercion. For this reason, it is closely related to the recognition of diversity and multiculturalism. In addition, the UNPF has prepared a small guide for internal work with tips that develop a program that take into account cultural diversity, such as investing time in knowing the culture of the population, understanding how values, practices, and beliefs affect human behavior, listen to what the community has to say, soliciting feedback on different aspects of a project to encourage local buy-in and create a sense of ownership of the project. Also showing respect, showing understanding and respect for the roles and functions of community leaders, encourage inclusion, because, well, the best way to dispel mistrust is through transparent process of consultation and negotiation. Also, avoiding value judgments, working with local allies, assuming the role of facilitator, fulfilling promises and treaties.
So now we're gonna talk in regards to the UN, which is the international organization. Firstly, we would like to say that the UN believes it is very important that the state is configured to integrate the most vulnerable sectors of the population in order to ensure equality and equity. This can be done through two fronts. First, through the strengthening of the justice institutions in an effort to aid and attend displaced populations, and through the improvement of conditions for vulnerable populations. The United Nations defends that justice institutions were some of the most affected parties during the conflict, as it has lost most of its credibility and link to the people. We believe action must be taken to strengthen it and ensure institutional justice for displaced populations in Chiapas. As of the year 2012, there were 24,000 people which were displaced. For 3 years, the United Nations Office Against Drugs and Crime worked on a law to defend these populations, which was approved by the Congress of Chiapas in 2012. Another thing that was done was that the meaning of the word displaced was defined in the Congress, as well as how to prevent them and attend them. In regards to the aid of socially and economically vulnerable populations, one example of the UN taking action in this conflict on the local level is how dialogues were established in the San Jose de Abascan community. This is a very vulnerable community where 70% of the population did not finish primary school and 30% are illiterate, while it lacks basic electricity, drinking water, and sanitation services. The Fund for the Achievement of the Millennium Development Goals, established in 2010 to 2012, established dialogues in which the communities and the government participated and from where 45 hectares of land were successfully distributed. Other actions taken were the improvement of floors and stuffs in homes and the promotion of sports and partnership through sports.
Well, thank you, everybody. So now, according what we have seen, let's move on to the agreements. Consider that the most damaged one here had been the indigenous community. Once again, we propose to carry out the ratification and execution of the San Andrés Larrainzar Agreement and the international agreements from the International Labour Organization and the UN. Likewise, a sanction section in case of violation or breaching of these agreements. On the other hand, public policies from the government in synergy with the Indigenous Communities National Institute be granted the jurisdiction of the state and receive the essential services.
Okay. There is a motivation and interest in having fewer corruption problems to solve, because having a country with peace and prosperity brings more investors, tourism, safe and honest trade, and will result in a really healthy economy. Therefore, audit those who distribute government social support resources to ensure that there is no diversion of funds. Another offer well-paid jobs to all those involved.
Additionally, the UN proposes an integral strategy that involves 5 fronts in order to solve this conflict. First, the first proposal is the strengthening of the Procuraduría. The second one is working with the judges of peace and indigenous conciliation. The third one is teaching communities about their institutional rights, especially displaced communities, and what they can do while using justice. Fourth would be the preventive work with the involved parties in order to prevent conflict. And the fifth will be the creation of a legal framework which protects displaced populations.
Great. So summarizing our agreements will be the ratification and execution of the San Andrés Lazarenzar Agreement and the international agreements from the ILO for the UN with an extra section in case of violating or breach these agreements. Audit those who distribute government social support resources to ensure that there is no diversion of funds, and the integral strategy that involves the 5 prongs proposed by Amparo Barrera, the UN expert. All in favor?
Yes, indigenous communities in favor.
Yes, the UN is also in favor.
Okay, Mexican state in favor.